This week on London Real, we have Rory Sutherland, Vice Chairman of Ogilvy and Mather.
You know, there is the production of something and there's the creation of the environment in which that thing can be appreciated and valued. If perception is much worse than reality, what the hell are you doing trying to improve the reality? The conscious part of the brain thinks it's the Oval Office, when in reality it's the press office. And the nice thing about working in advertising is that although you earn less than banking, you are much, much richer in one way because you can kind of decide what your idea of a good life is. Without the understanding of evolution, there are a lot of things that simply make no sense. The second thing an advertising agency provides is it's a corporate environment where you can make stupid suggestions and still get promoted.
London Real presents Rory Sutherland, Mad Men.
Can you design tax in a way that people want to pay it?
London Real presents a gathering of the greatest minds in the history of our show, announcing a 3-day transformational experience live in London. Become part of the conversation. Challenge yourself. Upgrade your peer group. Change your game. Become real. London Real Academy. Build the best you.
When I go in and look at a person or a business, I want to hear him talk about his dreams.
Am I living in alignment to the way I want to be living? And there's a feeling you get if you're not.
A community of action-oriented people that will keep you accountable to your goals. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. London Real Set Design by Timothy Olton. This week's guest is a gentleman by the name of Rory Sutherland. He is the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy and Mather Group UK, one of the largest marketing and communications companies in the world. He's an ad man, and he is kind of the quintessential version of the Don Draper of England that you would hope. I would say he is almost as English as our brand new set with Winston the dog, and it was really fascinating for me to sit down with Rory. He has very famous TED Talks that are up, I think, that have been watched millions and millions of times, Perspectives of an Ad Man, and he really has a different way of looking at the psychology of human beings as one who has professionally marketed to them for so many years. He had great perspectives. He really took up the space in the studio and in the chair, and I have a funny feeling that Rory is going to charm you as quickly as he charmed me. You know, when I was conducting this interview with him, I just thought, you know, to all the people out there that don't live in England, everyone would hope that a guy like this exists in England, and so I was just so happy that we could feature him for you. He's got so many fascinating perspectives when it really comes down to what we perceive as humans and how we perceive the value, and so many fascinating case studies and psychology going on here. So I really hope you enjoy. It's just fun-filled and action-packed the whole time, including his revelations of what it was like to be an ad man in the Draper times or even in the 80s in London, and how sometimes going down to the pub was one of the most productive things they did all week. So I'll leave those bits for you, but I hope you enjoy that and the brand new studio. I hope you have also had a chance to check out, well, probably one of the most wonderful things to happen to me since the creation of London Real, and that is the London Real Academy. The Academy is where people are taking their games to the next level. It's where all of the hardcore London Reelers, you know who you are, the ones that put the comments on YouTube, that subscribe to all of our social media, it's where they can go to get even more. And it's where you can go to watch all of the full episodes without any pop-ups, without any drama. All you do is log in with your social media over there, and boom, you've got a free run at all of the full episodes. And if you want to see some of our fabulous premium content, like our live event at the Ritz with Dan Pena, if you want to watch our shows like Rory Live, if you want to get access to our exclusive coursework, our whole library now of webinars that I conduct every Wednesday, but more importantly, you know, to get accountable and become part of what I call this new tribe, then definitely become a full founding member. We call it the Founding 500, the first 500 members here, and we just keep each other accountable all day. The real treasure is the activity feed. That is where everyone's posting their goals, their challenges, problems they're having when they need help, and everyone in the Academy runs to the rescue with either a helping hand or a word of encouragement or a command to stand up, brush yourself off, and let's get back to business. So I love everything that's happening there. I hope you see you over there. And if you join, send me a private message. We've got a sick, amazing social network, lots of groups, lots of things going on. So there you go. Now I am going to leave you with just a fascinating man and a gentleman who is English in all senses of the word, Mr. Rory Sutherland. London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Rory Sutherland, who is the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy and Mather Group UK, one of the largest marketing communication companies in the world. You write for The Spectator under the Wikiman column, and you have given multiple TED and TEDx talks around the world, such as Life Lessons from an Ad Man and Perspective is Everything. I just saw you speak right around the corner at the technology event Digital Shortage, where you talked about blazing new trails, shaking up the model of agency, startup, and brand. Rory, welcome to London Real.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure.
It's very nice to have you here. There's something about an ad man, I think, that always fascinates us. So I want to get kind of into your head later. But you said that advertising adds value to a product by changing our perception rather than changing the product itself. It's something I saw in one of your TED Talks, and I was wondering if you could tell us more about that concept.
It's an important point because we like to think, and neoclassical economics insists that we think that products have a kind of intrinsic objective value, and the truth of the matter is they don't. I mean, a huge amount of the value of a product is resident in simply the frame by which we perceive it. Whether things are expensive or cheap or not, for example, is determined simply by our frame of reference or comparison. And a very good story I can tell about that, which always fascinates me, is a friend of mine joined a club in London called the RAC Club, which is fantastically expensive to join. I think it's something like £2,500 a year.
Yeah, it's on Pall Mall, right?
It's on Pall Mall.
Beautiful club. Yeah.
Fantastic place. Yeah. And most of his friends slightly ridiculed him and said, "What on earth are you doing? What an insane amount of money to spend." He said, No. He said, "There's no check I write every year that I'm happier to write than my membership fee to the RAC Club." And they said, "What on earth do you mean?" He said, "Well, I live out in the country, but I need to go into London quite regularly. I need to stay the night there, maybe once a fortnight or maybe once a week. And my alternative," he said, "is to buy a crappy flat in London. Now, if I buy a rubbish flat in London, the council tax alone is going to cost me about £3,000 a year. And for that, all I get is a fairly rotten flat in London with, a bedroom, a kitchen, and, maybe, a slightly dismal bathroom." He said, "With this, I pay £2,500 a year, and I get something like 5 squash courts, 4 full-size billiards tables. I get a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, 5 restaurants, 4 bars, a library. I can stay there overnight in what is sort of 5-star accommodation for a trivial amount of money. I even have 20 staff on call and my own post office." And with the additional benefit with the club, of course, unlike a flat, that nobody rings you at 2 o'clock in the morning and says your immersion tank's just burst, you need to come over and fix the leak. There is no work, no redecoration, no effort required. You write the check. So framed as an alternative to actual accommodation, suddenly that club membership is not a gratuitous extravagance. It's in fact a bargain.
Right.
And so even things as you would think of as fundamentally, as sort of objective as the price of something, entirely depends on how, the frame of reference which is applied. And likewise, the way we value things may depend entirely on the frame of mind that we actually bring to them.
Aren't we always taught, like, all the classical economists, that things have this value because of this and that, and there is this inherent value in, say, a commodity, food, oil, a price of a plane ticket.
I mean, you get all sorts of weird views on value. I think there was an earlier school, much derided, called the French physiocrats, who believed that the only place where value was created was when you extracted something from the land. It was, as you can imagine, it was very popular with the aristocratic movement because it suggested that farmers, landowners, and the owners of quarries were the only people who generated economic value. Right. And in fact, if you took wool from a sheep and transformed it into a hat and sold it for a markup, you were actually exploiting the sheep farmer.
Okay.
That was so
a political model.
Bizarre
right?
views of value have pervaded. I suppose Marxism has the labour theory of value, for example. But there is this very strong belief that what you have has a value and that there is a right price for it. The Austrian school dissents here, and they're very, very clear. There's a whole discipline called praxeology, and in the books of Ludwig von Mises, they're absolutely clear that the value of something purely depends on the context in which we consume or enjoy it. So there's a wonderful phrase in Ludwig von Mises which says that you can't objectively say that the man who cooks the food in a restaurant creates more value than the man who sweeps the floor. Because one person produces the good, the other person produces the environment in which it's possible to enjoy it. And so the reason he says that is he's actually making a defense of advertising and marketing by saying that, there is the production of something and there's the creation of the environment in which that thing can be appreciated and valued. And a restaurant that produces Michelin-starred food but which smells of sewage, to take an extreme example, is rather like a very good product that's badly advertised.
Right.
And you have that all the time, I think. I think genuinely, there are great businesses that fail, not because the product they produce has anything intrinsically wrong with it, but because they've never worked out a way to sell it.
Right. Can you see those products a mile away sometimes?
Well, there was a very interesting case a few years ago, which I always harken back to, which was that the Royal Mail, which you've lived here in the UK, it's actually pretty good.
No, it's impressive.
Okay? I mean, I can't think of an instance where a letter of mine has gone missing, actually, in the last 10 years.
No.
It's a very interesting question, by the way. Is a stamp good value or not? Well, compared to taking it there yourself, as someone once beautifully said of the price of a stamp, So let me get this straight. You'll take my letter, overnight you'll take it all the way up to Glasgow, find the house of my best friend and pop it through the door, and for that you want 60p. You greedy bastard. Actually the value of it is rather remarkable. But they decided for some bizarre reason that they wanted to get the percentage of first-class letters delivered the next day in the UK. Admittedly, the UK is not very big. This probably excludes the north of Scotland, by the way. But effectively, it's around about sort of 97% or something.
Okay, get there the next day.
And they wanted to get it up to 98. Now, they more or less broke the Royal Mail in this effort to increase next-day delivery of first-class mail from 97% to 98.5%. And it imposed huge costs on the system. And no one noticed the fundamental problem, which is the value of a first-class stamp doesn't depend on the probability that the letter will arrive tomorrow. It depends on my belief that it will. Now, if you think about it, no one will ever notice, unless you're mad enough to post 200 letters to yourself every day and keep a record, no one is ever going to notice the difference between 97% and 98%.
Right.
So the interesting thing was, if you went and asked people what percentage of first-class letters arrived the next day, typical answers ranged from sort of the most pessimistic being 40% to people saying 70 or 80. Nobody said 98. Now, here's the von Mises point, if you like, which is you're producing great food, but the restaurant smells bad. If perception is much worse than reality, what the hell are you doing trying to improve the reality in a way that's more or less unnoticeable? You need to be improving the perception. Now, what you could have done is simply advertise the fact that it's 97%, and people would have said, wow, that's much better than I expected. Well done. They did something even better than that, actually. They advertised the fact that the British Postal Service is more reliable than the German Postal Service. And in Britain, we have a very simple heuristic. If we're doing something better than the Germans, it's probably good enough, because we see the Germans as anally retentive perfectionists, and therefore, if we're actually outperforming them, we've probably got it sussed.
Right.
And so the very simple System 1 message is the British Postal Service is better than the German one. Now that is a much more important thing than improving the reality, simply changing the perception. And I think there are cases where, if you have that wonderful restaurant producing Michelin-starred food, but there's an unpleasant smell in the restaurant because there's a sewage leak, there's that danger that what the Royal Mail was at first trying to do was, let's make the food even better. No, get rid of the smell.
Right. Do you see that disconnect happening a lot with these emerging digital technologies, with what you do with Ogilvy Change? I mean, do you think when a product all of a sudden becomes popular, oftentimes very little thought was put into marketing?
What digital does is it provides you, I mean, I see the principal excitement of the digital revolution, to me, is psychological, not technological, in fact.
And advertising is all psychology. No.
Au fond, yeah. I would like to return to the days of the Mad Men era where there are actually psychologists knocking around in ad agencies. And we have actually, within Ogilvy Change, we employ 6 recent graduates. I think there's 1 social geographer and 5 psychology graduates. Okay. And I'm delighted by that reversion to the early Don Draper era. I make no apology for that.
I want to ask you about Don later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not really much of a body double for Don, I'll be absolutely candid with you. The fascinating thing I think there is that I think there are cases where there are wonderful products which, simply because of a tiny psychological snag or error in the way they're presented, the way they're named, the way they're designed, completely fail, simply because System 1, I'm borrowing from Daniel Kahneman here, just to explain the background.
Yeah, please explain the System 1 and 2, you just talked about it.
Kahneman quite rightly says this is not actually a fundamental truth about the structure of the brain, but it's a useful fiction, it's a useful verbal device.
Okay.
Which is to say that there are decisions the brain takes which are effectively System 1, which is effortless, very fast, largely unconscious.
Okay, amygdala.
Based on instinctive, kind of deep-rooted lizardy stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, which, by the way, is 99% of the work our brain does. 1 + 1, 2. That's a kind of System 1 thing. It's become automatic. Darts players actually subtracting from 501 is automatic. That's System 1. But if I said to you, what's 17 times 27, then suddenly your brain starts whirring, your eyes roll upwards in your head, it becomes a bit painful. That's a System 2 consideration.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, if you don't make the act of buying something attractive, or at the very least non-repellent to System 1, you can advance all the rational arguments you like, but you probably won't win the argument, any more than you can actually seduce someone by the use of purely rational argumentation.
Right, which we've all tried to do at
Which,
one point.
Broadly speaking, you can't argue someone into going home with you. It's as hopeless as that. And so, a better understanding of System 1, one of the things that excites me is I think that the digital age will just give us, because unintentionally, everything from sort of user experience design, website design, interface design, actually things like aircraft cockpit design, if you want to extend this out, are well-funded behavioural experiments into the workings of the deeper human mind. And I think through this, we will learn important lessons about how System 1 works and how it really makes decisions using a kind of a mathematics and a kind of algorithms which are very, very different to the ones which are used when we make decisions rationally.
Right, and as a group, because I think you had said that for an ad man, the digital technology, it makes you have to understand the human mind even more.
Yes,
it's less of a group think and it's more...
Because actually, one of the fantastic things I always say is that the digital world is like the Galapagos Islands for the understanding of evolutionary psychology. The little foibles of human behavior that crop up in online, for example, are very, very telling, I think, in what the deeper human mind really cares about, what it finds attractive, more important, in fact, what it finds repellent.
Okay.
Because I think actually the System 1 brain is more about the avoidance of catastrophe than the attainment of perfection. I'll give you an example of a product which I haven't told the client this, so I hope he's not watching. There's a brilliant, brilliant product which I recommend you buy. I'm shamelessly plugging one of our clients' products here. It's called the Philips Air Fryer, and it's a device that effectively fries food without the use of any fat. You put maybe 2 or 3 drops of olive oil on something, whether it be French fries, uncooked French fries, whatever it may be, simply to create the aroma of oil. And then you put it in a drawer, and in a very short period, it blasts superheated air at the food and produces food that's warm on the inside, crispy on the outside, with no fat being involved at all. It's a miracle product. I mean, not just me, I bought one for my father, who's 84, for his birthday, and he became a complete convert and evangelist as well. And I simply couldn't understand why this product was less popular than it deserved to be. And then I probably realised that actually it's called fryer, and middle-class people believe they don't eat fried food. And so this is my latest hypothesis. I'm intrigued in looking at things because I genuinely believe an awful lot of our contentment and happiness resides actually in the darker parts of the brain, the parts of the brain that aren't really connected to speech. So the interesting thing about System 1 is that System 2 does most of the talking. What System 2 is mostly doing is actually post-rationalising decisions taken by System 1. Jonathan Haidt, a professor at the University of Virginia, and author of a book which is called The Righteous Mind, which I would argue is one of the best books I've read in the last 10 years. I plug that unashamedly, along with books like Nudge, for example, and Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think he uses the analogy that that in a sense, the conscious part of the brain thinks it's the Oval Office when in reality it's the press office. It thinks it's making the decisions. In reality, the decisions are being made elsewhere in the brain, and the conscious talkative part of the brain is simply cobbling together hasty post-rationalizations to make narrative sense of a decision that was taken somewhere else, which is what a press officer does, being slightly harsh. Okay. And that actually, there's a large amount, and this has huge implications for market research, that actually the reasons we say we like something or the reasons we say we don't like something don't bear much relation to the real reasons. Now, I gave an example in my talk earlier, which is if I had gone into that hall, which I don't plan to do at any time soon, and started throwing human feces around the room, most people would have regarded my behaviour as completely disgusting and revolting and would have presumably left or even pilloried me in some way. If I'd asked them why was that a bad thing to do, they would have said, and this is probably sort of the right answer, it's because there's a risk of germs and infection and it's really unhygienic and so forth. But actually, if you look at the human brain, we needed a mechanism that made us avoid poo for the 2 million years before we discovered germ theory in the late 19th century. And that mechanism is System 1, visceral disgust at human, particularly carnivore feces. We're slightly less disgusted by herbivore feces. I'm Welsh, so that might be a dangerous revelation. Maybe other people don't think like that. But generally, sheep poo or cow poo isn't that unpleasant to us. But carnivore poo, cat poo, is really, really horrible.
Right.
And the reason is that we have that System 1, revulsion, which exists and still exists in us. And it's a product of the time when we didn't know about germs, so we needed a mechanism to encourage us to avoid them. And the brain is full of those evolved million-year-old mechanisms which cause us to do things. Now, here, because we've discovered germs, we probably give a fairly accurate explanation. Poo is bad because of the risk of infection. Right. If you'd asked someone in the late 16th century, they would have said that it was sacrilegious or, barbaric. But their explanations would have been the best attempt at explaining an emotional reaction to a visceral reaction. And I think a lot of what when you research people's behaviour now, I think it's equivalent to explaining why you didn't like poo in the 16th century. So one of the things that fascinates me is things that people hate and they don't quite know why. And people really, really hate airport security. You probably fly quite a bit.
I do, yeah.
I'm guessing.
The Yanks are getting better.
Yeah, but marginally. But that business of going through the security line, people find disproportionately distressing. And to be honest, if you ask them why, they don't really know.
Right.
They'll come up with, well, it's humiliating, blah, 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 blah. Now, interestingly, when I last went to Heathrow, and I don't know whether this is some good psychologists getting involved, 6 of you, when you reach the front of the queue, 6 of you stand there in parallel against a table, and in your own time, you divest yourself of metallic objects into a tray, put the laptop into the tray. Then when you're ready, and in any order you choose, you pick up your tray and put it on the conveyor belt, and it goes through the X-ray, and you walk through the machine that goes bing.
Right.
Now, what I immediately noticed is that is much less stressful than the previous system. There is an instinctive human thing, which is I don't want to look like a fool in front of a queuing crowd of people. So when I arrived at the front of the queue, when it was the standard system where it was one at a time in order, I had the fear that I would mess up, forget my belt, forget my watch, look like an idiot in front of other people, and that was making me anxious. But I didn't really know the reason for the anxiety. What's interesting is that when you change the system so that a mistake on my part doesn't actually delay people behind me,
Right, so someone's thinking.
the anxiety disappears. But you couldn't have relied on people's explicit explanation of the problem to solve the problem. What you need to do is come up with hypotheses about why people are stressed, and then come up with a solution which solves it, which indeed that system does. Now, interestingly, I knew a little bit about this anxiety because I've worked a little bit with the fast food industry, and there's a known moment of what's called menu stress, which is you're in front of the queue at KFC, and you're blithering or dithering over your choice, and you can feel kind of the laser eyes of the 6 people behind you going, get a move on, you tosser, I want to order my food.
Right.
And so that, I find the whole thing very, very interesting because when you design an object, this is the phrase I always use, the comparison I always use. When we design physical objects, okay, we design car steering wheels, the handle of that kettle over there, a mug. They're designed to work with our evolved physique. So the mug fits nicely into my hand, the steering wheel works well with the hands I've got. Now, we didn't evolve hands for holding mugs or for steering cars, patently, okay? Totally different reasons, holding weaponry, swinging from trees, whatever theory you want to advance, but not for driving cars. But when we design physical objects, without any effort required, we design them to work with our evolved physique because that makes sense. There's no point in designing a car you steer with your nose. And so when we design experiences, or when we design choices, or when we design websites for that matter, it makes perfectly good sense also to design them to work with our evolved psychology. And what we, I think, sometimes do is we design products for what Richard Thaler calls econs, which is a completely imaginary species which has never existed, that probably wouldn't have survived had it sprung up by chance, which is that completely rational man, beloved of economic models, which would be, in my view, completely hopeless in any real-world situation.
So you're saying a lot of people sell to the frontal lobe when they should really be thinking back
so
here.
The frontal lobe, to be honest, it's probably our amygdala that keeps us alive most of the time, and the way in which Homo sapiens makes decisions is different to the way that Homo economicus, or the econ, as Thaler calls it, makes decisions.
Okay. These aren't economists, these are just...
Thaler coined this fantastic phrase, and someone else coined the phrase Homo economicus, which is the imaginary species of human that inhabits only economic models, but actually does not exist in the wild.
You don't like economists much, do you?
No. Actually, good economists are fine. The problem with economics, if I can digress a bit, is that, when I talk about econs, when I talk about these naive models of human behavior, okay, what I'm not doing is talking about Joseph Stiglitz, okay, or Gary Becker even, possibly, okay? The problem is that this very bad shallow view of economics infects things like business schools and MBA programs, and then infects the world of business.
Okay.
And my view is that there's an imbalance between what you might call, because the financial function in business has become disproportionately powerful, particularly in the UK actually, over the last 15 years, then there are quite a lot of business decisions taken effectively by finance people who believe that neoclassical economic theory is also a guide to likely human behaviour.
Okay.
And that does disturb me. So,
because you see where the rubber hits the road, where they actually don't.
Yeah. So actually, the extent to which people are massively price sensitive, for example, may be untrue. So there's a tendency, I think, that the economic world prizes only one thing in a business, which is efficiency. And it pursues efficiency at all costs without actually arguing, but efficiently producing what? You can efficiently produce something which doesn't actually arouse much gratitude or enjoyment in its recipient.
Right.
And what you're doing is totally pointless. Now, I'll give you a wonderful example of this pursuit of efficiency, okay? Which I gave today, and I'd like to thank a guy called Sam McNerney from New York, who gave me this example on a phone call we had recently. Very, very good Wired writer, by the way. If you go into Five Guys, the splendid burger chain, and you'll typically order a burger and some fries and probably a drink. You order the fries, and there are 3 sizes, small, medium, large, and they come in a cup respectively a small, medium and large sized cup. And they will take a great big scoop of their fantastic fries, or indeed Cajun fries, and they will fill the cup. And then they will take another scoop and chuck a load of extra fries into the bottom of the brown paper bag. Now, you could say this is kind of in keeping with the Carnot model, which is a fantastic thing. We disproportionately appreciate the things which a business gives us, which it doesn't have to. Those things which are kind of the extra mile or the guilt on the gingerbread that a business does. I'll give you an earlier example. I was staying at the W Hotel in the late 90s. This is before the days of Wi-Fi, and the typical thing you'd always forget would be your modem cable back in the mid to late 90s. And when I opened up the minibar in the W Hotel in New York, alongside the condoms and spirits, goodness knows what else, there was, admittedly for $10, but there was a modem cable.
Right.
And that didn't have to be there. And the kind of, wow, this is a good hotel effect was 10 times greater from that than it was from the Johnny Walker Red, which kind of has to be there. And the extra fries are the fries we really appreciate. That's why we actually psychologically just go woo and go slightly gooey in the presence of Five Guys. Now, you bring an economist or an accountant into the mix, what's the first thing they cut? The first thing they cut are the fries you don't have to give people. But the fries you don't have to give people are probably where the majority of the System 1 emotional value in the transaction actually lies. Think about it. If you buy someone a particularly generous present, what's the default human response? You really didn't have to. So it's the things... Now, you can understand why in an evolutionary setting we might judge people and their behaviour not purely by the extent to which they adhere to contracts, but by the extent to which they're prepared to give us a little bit extra than was necessary. Right. The baker's dozen. You know,
right.
if you go back in history as an example of this.
Yeah.
And the typical accountant will go in and go, well, the product is basically medium fries, burger, drink. So let's go into Five Guys. We'll get rid of the free peanuts, okay, which is another Carnot detail. Right. We'll get rid of the surplus fries. We're going to meet our Q3 2015 targets with money to spare, except suddenly no one wants to go there anymore. It'll take time, by the way. It'll take years for people to spot, because System 1 probably operates on a slightly, slow
but their
level
models
of perception.
don't appreciate those Carnot curves.
And so likewise, the example I gave today was Saatchi's, under the director Tony Kaye, produced a fantastic advertisement for intercity trains in the later 80s, which showed people playing chess, reading novels, relaxing.
You played it today, yeah.
That was what System 1 really likes about a train journey. Now,
the quiet time, the relaxing time.
The relaxing time. And actually, if you'd said, okay, the competitive set here is aircraft and it's cars. Let's not obsess about speed, as with High Speed 2, because if you really want to get to Manchester in a hurry, you'll fly anyway. The fact, by the way, that you can't fly to Manchester except from Heathrow on feeder flights rather suggests that the pre-existing demand to get to Manchester really quickly is not all that high. But let's park that fairly obvious market example. The point of a train, okay, isn't to be faster than an aircraft, it's to be preferable to an aircraft. And the great thing about a train is that you get on the train and you spend an uninterrupted period of, say, 2 hours getting on with whatever you like, reading, being relatively undisturbed. Nowadays, of course, the ad was made in the late 80s. Nowadays, you'd be people watching films on a tablet DVD player, people sending emails, people using Wi-Fi, whatever. Now, the problem with the railways is that because they're run by disproportionately male people with exclusively a kind of System 2 background in finance and engineering, they think the way to improve a railway is through objective numerical measures. Journey time, speed, duration, all that kind of stuff. Right. And actually, my view is, actually, the reason people go by train rather than flying or rather than driving is probably not much to do with that at all. Okay. There are a few exceptions. Commuting into London from the outside, it's much faster by train than driving, but it's also much less stressful as well, incidentally. And if you design railways for System 1, at least to a degree, what you'd have by now is you'd have a cup holder, you'd fold down the table and there'd be a little ledge so you could prop your tablet up against the back of the seat. There would be probably Wi-Fi on the trains, or at least some sort of entertainment system with a few terabytes of films I can download. We would have done all that stuff, and we would have said, okay, and actually the seating would not be regimented like an aircraft. It would be highly varied with little curved seats, occasional little sofas, a bit like the new cinemas. More and more cinemas are actually producing varied seating.
But the economists and engineers are just thinking about the marginal return.
Absolutely preoccupied with effectively find a numerical engineering metric, which is may correlate with System 1 preferences, not at all. I mean, I'll be absolutely candid. I rather like the journey up to Manchester now. It's about 2 hours 10. It's the perfect train journey.
Just make it more comfortable.
Slightly different if I'm a commuter. Now, high-speed one is different. There are two things which make it different, okay? If you take city pairs like Lyon and Paris, where high-speed rail, the TGV, changes the journey time from 4 hours to 2, that's what I call a significant, there's a kind of tipping point there. Now I can actually go Lyon, Paris and back for the day. I don't need to stay in a hotel, and do that usual palaver when it's a 4-hour journey. I can just, effectively go there and back in the day. 4 hours to 2, Kyoto or Osaka to Tokyo. Their high-speed rail makes a kind of complete, it's an order of magnitude change in the actual nature of the journey, if you like. If you reduce a journey from 2 hours and a bit to 1 hour and 37, then on a commuter route, that might be quite significant, because if I commute in from Canterbury, which with high-speed one, it's now 40 minutes faster in each direction, maybe a bit more, okay? Saving 80 minutes a day, okay, 210 times a year, 220 times a year, is quite a big deal. But that's one person saving 80 minutes a day 200 times. 200 people saving 80 minutes once is not the same thing psychologically.
Right.
So although the reduction in journey time may be comparable, the actual effect it has on behaviour and preference is relatively trivial. I don't go to Manchester often enough to care about the journey time to that degree. That's the first point. There may be people who commute from Manchester to London, but they don't need a train, they need an estate agent.
You made your point.
Okay.
That's very good. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You once joked in one of your TED Talks that you said savings is just consumerism postponed. And it was very funny.
Yeah.
But, I worked in banking for 10 years, and people used to always say, the 10-year-old on the street would say, what do you do in banking? Do you steal everyone's money? And I would try to explain that I actually did this and did that.
Of course.
Do you ever get the 10-year-old asking you as an ad man, what do you do as an ad man? Because some people think that it's about selling people things that they don't want, but now you're telling people that you might not even know about a product because you don't know how to understand that product.
You could produce a brilliant life-enhancing product, market it badly, and as a result, either fail as a business or completely underserve the public, simply because you had failed to make the product comprehensible. Now, there's some really fantastic little experiments here in the behavioral sciences, which is, one example is, if a product just seems slightly dissonant, if it doesn't quite make sense, people won't buy it. Now, I'll get a lovely example. The lovely experiment is, you go to people and say, here are 10 Sharpie pens, all black. How much will you pay? Okay? And you average the amounts out, and maybe, probably going to be about $8 or $9 would be my guess. And then you show an identical group of people, 10 black Sharpie pens and 1 yellow one or 1 green one. The amount they're prepared to pay is less, because the addition of the rogue colour makes the product, the 10 black pens and 1 weird coloured one, just is not cognitively comfortable for me to process. Now, if an ad man came along, what he'd do is he'd say 10 Sharpies, free highlighter pen. Now, the second you've done that, that's a kind of Don Draper, kind of insight. The second you do that, now the yellow pen makes sense to me, and I'll pay more than I would for the 10 black Sharpies on their own. Right. So that's a case where you can have products which are just cognitively dissonant and fail, even when they objectively contain more utility than the alternative. Now, there's a beautiful example of this from product design, which is a case where you have to worship the man. I think it's Morita from Sony. And he commissioned the Sony Walkman, and he had a slightly selfish motive behind his desire for a Sony Walkman, which is he wanted to be able to fly from Tokyo to Los Angeles, I think, and listen to a whole opera on the flight. And the guys came back with the first Walkman design, to his specification, and they'd added something. They'd added record functionality on the first Walkman. And he said, why did you put the record functionality on? I didn't ask for it. And they said, I know, but we looked at the basic costings, and you can basically add recording functionality to the Walkman for literally, it's going to be $1 per unit or some trivial amount like that. So why wouldn't you do it? And he said, get rid of it. He said, but it's $1, it's nothing, and it lets you record. Get rid of it. And the engineers went away in a sulk. But he was absolutely right, because he said, if the Sony Walkman will play but will not record, everybody can understand what it's for, and they can either decide, I want that or I don't want that. Clear decision, okay? Which is, okay, it might be quite nice to listen to music while I'm mowing the lawn or whatever it may be, or while I'm on the train on to work. I get that. I get that thing. The second you add record functionality, that's the weird yellow pen. And it's people thinking, oh, what is this? Is it kind of a dictaphone? Is this for office use? You know, should I use this when I interview people as a journalist? What the hell's going on here? Right. So, in fact, removing what is objective utility from a product can actually make it more desirable.
Right, and we're seeing this happen more in tech these days. You gave the example of Google in some of your previous speeches, but
it stripped things out.
Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, the whole process of who's the dominant factor, you start off with, I guess, AOL, which is online access, dial-up, a walled garden, and search functionality.
Yeah, and
then you strip out the actual the connectivity. It becomes Yahoo.
Right.
And then you strip out the information and reduce it right down to search, and then suddenly it becomes Google.
Right.
Or Alta Vista. Give them their just high five.
I've had tech founders in here before that they say every week we delete a feature. And see how the consumer reacts, and if we don't see a drop-off, we delete another one to try to do one thing well. I mean,
and there's probably in System 1, there's a kind of jack-of-all-trades heuristic. You know, in other words, we don't really like Swiss Army knives.
Right. We want one thing.
We want one thing that does one thing really, really well.
Traditionally, in the caveman days, in our amygdala, that's how it worked, and that's how it's still in our mind needs to work.
It's in a sense a dilemma for anybody. Now, you can see it with Uber, who quite understandably and not insanely are thinking of making little forays into things like parcel delivery or ice cream delivery or whatever.
Yeah.
And it makes sense for them once they've got a large user base to broaden the possible uses. But there's a risk attached to that as well, which is it becomes a bit more fuzzy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, what Uber is now is perfectly clear. By the way, a really important point. Actually, I'll raise this question now. I don't know who my audience is going to be, but I'll raise it anyway. There are two things I don't understand as a marketer, okay? And I think this is where the pernicious influence of accountants and particularly labour market theorists is becoming damaging. Amazon doesn't seem to treat its warehouse workers very well.
Notoriously, they charge for aspirin, I think. Or, you know, Jeff Bezos.
So I've got a headache.
Jeff Bezos is a hard ass on his employees.
Your lavatory breaks are timed, aren't they? I think so. You know, if you've got if you had a particularly tough on the British ones, you might have had a curry the night before. You know, I mean, you don't know. But my answer is, what proportion of Amazon's actual costs are really labour costs? I'm imagining when I buy a typical Amazon product and I pay, £9.47. What proportion of that is labour? My guess is a bloody rounding error, right? Why would you do that? If you look at the great entrepreneurs of the early pioneers of Unilever who created Port Sunlight, and actually Henry Ford, in a sense, created the 2-day weekend, and I think he doubled all his workers' salaries more or less overnight.
Yeah.
So you have these people who basically were so keen to demonstrate the superiority of their model that they demonstrated that it was superior not only for the customer and for the owner, the share owner, but also superior to the employee. Right. Why would you not replicate that rather magnificent Victorian thing and move backwards to a kind of mill owner mentality? Now, my point is, I can argue this rationally anyway, because one, what's the really big existential threat to Amazon? Well, surely it's that someone dies in a warehouse and there's a mass boycott. Okay, that's the existential threat, is mass human behavior. Uber is now getting greedy with its drivers. Now, Uber, okay, has the potential to become an insanely dominant and wealthy organization for the simple reason that it's a screen business, it's not a taxi business. It removed the uncertainty my System 1 used to suffer between ordering a cab and the cab arriving.
Right.
Which is, where is it? They said 10 minutes, he still hasn't arrived. Is he round the corner? Oh God, can you go out on the street and see if he's gone right? Oh God, maybe he's left. Okay. Now I just look at the map and go, oh look, he's stuck at those traffic lights. I'll have another pint. Okay. Right. So Uber solves this problem beautifully because the more you use it, the easier things come. That's something about System 1, that it loves habit, it loves ritual. It's why Amazon hasn't significantly redesigned. Amazon's never had a revolutionary redesign of its page, because we just love familiar shit. System 1 just loves, oh, I know this, I can do it automatically. Don't need to engage System 2, straight in, okay? Right. Now, my question is with Uber, why is it getting, it's going to make a bloody fortune because it's hacked this fantastic thing. It's got magnificent kind of, ability to scale up. The costs must be absolutely trivial. The one thing that might stop me using that damn service is the driver grumbling to me about how they're a bunch of bastards and I want to use Lyft.
All right, that's an open question. You can tweet him at Rory Sutherland. I want to hear answers to Uber and the Amazon.
But I'll give an extra question, which is that a lot of these people, okay, now I've got a client I can't name, and the reasons will become obvious in a second. And they've got a brilliant call center. I mean, it's like fantastic. So the people who ring it up are absolutely delighted. The customer service ratings are through the roof. The people are really knowledgeable, helpful, and fantastic. And I asked my client, without naming the business, I said, "Why is that call center so good?" He said, "To be absolutely honest," he said, "I think we overpay them."